Hello plant lovers, Matthew in Melbourne welcoming you on this sunny winter's afternoon to my channel, and here is the orchid of the day which we'll get to in a minute, but do hit subscribe if you're interested in following my journey of growing cold, cool, intermediate orchids here in Melbourne with no added equipment such as greenhouses, etc. I either grow orchids indoors or outdoors or get out of the pool. And so, plant lovers, let us turn our attention to this beauty. Look at these flowers and look at the form. Look, I don't know, it's very sort of Japanese, it's balanced. It looks like ikebana almost. It's a beautiful orchid, and it was a rescue orchid, and you know, I love a rescue orchid. So last year, just before Melbourne went into its 4-month hard lockdown, I of course went on a mercy dash to my favourite nursery just to see, you know, what might be going on. And this had the dying remnants of its flower spike, and it was on sale. It was half price. And I thought, I can't resist an on sale sad orchid. It's like the Phalaenopsis at a supermarket. They're pathway orchids anyway. So I bought it, and the flower spike finished and the plant progressed. And now, which is almost a year later, it has rewarded me with not 1, but 3 flower spikes. But let's get to some basics. Now, I didn't know what it was. I had to actually do an exhaustive search of the interweb to find out what it was based on the flower, because often such things are sold as Oncidium alliance orchids, which, you know, it's true, it is an Oncidium alliance. I always think they're characters from a Star Wars film though, the Oncidium alliance. Anyway, this one was, but I didn't know what it was until it flowered, and I was able to tell you that it is, ta-da! Now, it's had a bit of a name change. So it was Beallara Eurostar, but the Beallara moniker has actually changed, and they're now called Aliceara. So the name of this orchid is now Aliceara Eurostar, and I kind of like the Eurostar name because A, it reminds me of the railway, but it also kind of reminds me of Eurotrash, and you know, it's kind of flashy and big. Anyway, so I love the name, and I'm glad I know what you are called. So this is what it is now, Aliceara Eurostar, formerly known as Beallara Eurostar. And so this is one of those megamix hybrids of several different members of the Oncidium alliance. And this one's 3 key parents are an oncidium, a brassia, and a miltonia. And you can certainly see the brassia look in the flowers, which are quite amazing. I guess its parentage doesn't really matter. I think essentially I treat all of these kind of megamixes as I would most oncidiums. So let's get to that care information. But firstly, I just need to talk about the flowers. There is a very faint, spicy fragrance, and maybe your example might be different. Maybe it's a bit spicier, but it's certainly not a fragrance that you're going to walk past and go, oh, what is that? You really have to get your nose into it. So my example of this is not something to go for its fragrance. But as you can see, the flowers are really beautiful, and the white lip really sort of flicks up, it curves up. The color has changed somewhat. So when the flower opens, this little part here is actually really quite lime green. And then as the flower progresses, they get a little bit paler, but it's still essentially sort of a limey tip with a beautiful sort of mahogany burgundy interior, and then this incredible white lip. They're really beautiful flowers. Now mine, I'm jumping ahead of the game, but it's actually got 3 flower spikes. Can you see? So we've got this one here, which is just yet to open. Then we have this one here, which is the one with most of the blooms open now. And then we have another flower spike here, and they are all coming out of the same pseudobulb. Now, I don't know if that is a habit of these megamixes. They're very floriferous, if that is the word, or whether it was just a freak of nature, or it was just really happy to be saved at lockdown and wanted to flower for me. So to basics. Essentially, I treat this as an oncidium. So all of my oncidiums spend the summer outside, so they're undercover, they're protected from rain and other elements, but they get quite bright indirect light and a little bit of very gentle morning sun. And then when the autumn temperatures start to drop to about 10 degrees Celsius, which is about 50 degrees Fahrenheit, I then bring them inside. Now, I have read that here in Melbourne, you can keep oncidiums outdoors or winter. Now, some oncidiums, specific oncidium species, are cool, cold tolerant. So I'll do another film about those because I've got some that are about to come out into bloom. Now, I don't think cold weather is going to kill these, but it's not going to enable them to thrive. And just as a caveat, my cold temperatures never get below freezing here in Melbourne unless it's a freak evening during winter. So we can get down to 1 or 2 degrees Celsius, not common during winter, but our winters are quite cold and damp. So, and that 1 or 2 degrees is about 35 to 38 degrees Fahrenheit. So pretty cold, but just above the freezing threshold. So my experience has been they just don't thrive. They will survive, but not thrive, and we want to thrive. So what I do is I bring them inside, and they get quite beautiful dappled northern light, and there you go. So I do find that these types of oncidiums and oncidium megamixes do like cooler evening temperatures. So they like that real change between day and night temperature, not freezing obviously, but they need that kind of temperature differential, I think, to stimulate the flowering. Now, other oncidiums and megamixes do often flower twice in a year, spring and autumn. This one is flowering in midwinter, so there you go. So I'm not really sure. It's the first time it's flowered sort of organically for me, so I'm not really sure what its pattern might be, whether it's going to flower once a year or whether it might pluck up the courage to flower twice. Watering wise, pretty similar to most other oncidiums. Let it dry out-ish, not completely dry, and then water it. Don't keep it wet. Don't let it dry out completely though. And as you can see, plant lovers, I have potted mine in terracotta because, yes, I'm a terracotta pot kind of guy. So terracotta evaporates water really quickly, the water drains through, the evaporation creates a sort of a micro-humid environment for the orchid, and I just think it's aesthetically a bit more pleasing for me. Obviously, when they're outdoors and it's warm, you do have to be careful because terracotta does evaporate, hence it will dry out faster in summer. But what it does mean is that the roots don't stay in a soggy, wet mixture. So anyway, that's my thing. Obviously, with any orchid, it needs to be a free-draining pot, but you can pot it in whatever you want. Medium-wise, again, fairly typical orchid mix for me. It is a sort of a medium-ish to small size bark with a little bit of perlite, with a little bit of charcoal, with a tiny sprinkling of shell grits, which is actually a chicken food, and the shell grits have calcium in it. And at the very bottom, just a little bit of a splodge of sphagnum moss, and really, that's it. But my secret weapon is, and this orchid needed it, mycorrhizal fungi in the mix, along with a couple of grains, literally 1 or 2 of slow release general fertilizer. Mycorrhizal fungi, they do 2 things. I'm sure they do many things, but the 2 things that I'm aware of are they promote root growth, which in this case is very important. But what they also do, they kind of act as a go-between between the nutrients in the mix and the roots of the plant. So they help the plant extract the nutrients. So for example, those shell grits, the mycorrhizal fungi, help the plant take those nutrients out of, particularly the calcium, out of those shell grits and make it available for the plant to use and grow with. So yeah, mycorrhizal fungi, my secret ingredient. You can get it in packets online, very easy to find anywhere in the world, I imagine. And the reason this needed some help, I bought it from a nursery. They tend to have oncidiums from a local grower, which is fantastic. But, you know, they've been in the shop, they've been moved around. So this one, when I got it, as you can see, it's got this old pseudobulb here, and then it had this secondary pseudobulb here, and this was the one where the flower spike was attached when I bought it. And then this pseudobulb is the new growth, and that is the one that has produced 3 flower spikes. But when I bought this, the root system was, and I repotted it immediately, and I could see the root system was not very well developed, and it was really quite wobbly in the mix. So for me, rehabilitation was all about really just promoting root growth to stabilize the plant. So I wasn't really that fussed if it flowered or didn't flower in that first period of time. So it's taken 12 months really to establish itself, for this pseudobulb to really mature and for that root system to establish itself. And as you can see, it's quite firm in the pot now. And then it rewarded me with 1, 2, 3 flower spikes from that new pseudobulb. So I imagine generally these plants are going to follow the sort of the oncidium pattern of flowering from newly emerged pseudobulbs. The older pseudobulbs then kind of wither and die and pass on all their nutrients to their young pups. And therefore, the name of the game for next year is to stimulate new growth. And that is really just about general plant health. There's perhaps nothing specific you need to do, except make sure it's watered well, fertilized well, in a good medium, and you should get new growth. And fertilizer-wise, I give this maybe 1 out of 4 waterings, I give it a diluted seaweed-based fertilizer, and I dilute mine to about 1/8 of the recommended dosage on the bottle. And then, as I said, in the mix, I put a couple of grains of slow-release fertilizer, and what I will do in spring, so once these flowers are finished, I will put more of that slow-release fertilizer just on the top, but literally maybe 2 or 3 grains, not very much. And just making sure that you're not putting it anywhere near roots directly, because you know, they'll get toxic shock from all that food. It's like binging on McDonald's. So just be careful if you're putting it on the surface that you're not putting it anywhere near roots. There we go. I think we have covered everything. Light is pretty generic for oncidium, bright indirect light. Depending where you are, a little bit of very gentle early morning dappled sunlight can work if it's outdoors. So my regime is to summer them outdoors, winter them indoors. Now, depending wherever you are in the world, they will grow very happily indoors all year round. Or if you're somewhere that is slightly warmer than me, outdoors all year round. Or if you have a better enclosed outdoor area, I think they will be fine outdoors in winter as long as it doesn't freeze and as long as they're in a more protected area. But anyway, I have chosen to keep mine inside in winter. So there we are. I am really pleased with you, Beallara Eurostar, now known as Aliceara Eurostar. And interestingly, the Beallara bit comes from the nursery that first hybridized these back in the day, which is kind of interesting. It's sort of sad they've lost the name now, but anyway. I've enjoyed growing you. I'm all about rescuing orchids during this pandemic period. They deserve to thrive as much as we do. Anyway, it will be interesting to see just how often in a year it will flower. That's going to be totally dependent on the new growth I get. So we'll see, but in the meantime, it is doing very well. I am very happy. I did have a miltoniopsis rescue story, which I will link up here, because I am all about COVID rescue stories for orchids this pandemic season. Anyway, plant lovers, thank you very much for watching. Thanks for joining me. And if this is of any interest, feel free to subscribe. I do post every week, and I look forward to seeing you next week with another orchid adventure.